Okay, we need to talk about Alexander the Great. I'm sure we've all heard of him, but don't know his story. So let's get right to it. But first, this video is sponsored by me. I have 31 subscribers. Of course, I don't have a sponsorship, but please help me grow this channel. Every like, every subscribe helps. Thank you. Before we start, I want to give you a little background information about the times that Alexander was born in. The head honcho at the time was the Persian Empire. They controlled a huge landmass and took over pretty much whatever land they wanted. That being until 480 BC when they tried to take on parts of Greece. Athens and Sparta teamed off and ended up fighting off the Persian army. Even though they were a much smaller group than the huge Persian army, they still stuck together and forced them to retreat. The next 50 years were pretty calm until tensions started to rise between the two cities. After fighting for almost a century, they were vulnerable to a new power coming in and taking over. Up north was a place called Macedonia, and it was led by a man named Philip II, and he showed promise in turning Macedonia into a superpower. King Philip was known for the sarissa, which was an 18-foot spear double the length of a normal spear. This made his armies that much stronger because it was hard to attack them close range. In 338 BC, Philip's army crushed the Athens in the Battle of Cornea. Sorry if my pronunciation sucks. Following this victory, Philip would create the Hellenic League, which united all of Greece with Philip as the supreme commander. The only one that stood aside from this was Sparta. Now that Philip had a stranglehold on Greece, it was time for him to take on the mighty Persia. But on the night before he planned to go to war, his own bodyguard assassinated him. So why does this matter at all? Because the man that succeeded Philip II was his 20-year-old son named Alexander. Now Alexander might have only been 20 years old, but he already showed so much promise. He was born in 356 BC, and by the age of 12, people saw that he had a special gift. Apparently, there was this wild, angry horse named Bucephalus that nobody wanted to tame because they thought it was too dangerous. Well, supposedly, the 12-year-old Alexander went out and tamed it right away, and everyone looked at him as a superpower and superhuman, and everyone thought he was so crazy. So that was the first thing he did that made people turn their heads to him. And the next thing was, at the age of 13, he started being tutored by the one and only Aristotle. So now that Alexander was in control, he knew what he had to do. He had to follow in his father's footsteps and go take over Persia. But first he needed to deal with some problems at home because people in the empire believed that a 20-year-old Alexander shouldn't be leading them. So he went and proved them wrong. He went through the empire and killed any competition that he had, and then he made an example of the city of Thebes, burning it down and selling off all the citizens to slavery. Now that Alexander proved to everyone that he's capable and strong enough to run his own army, it was time to go take on Persia. At this time, Persia was split up into separate states called satraps. Now these satraps knew that Alexander was coming and they wanted to meet up. One of the generals of Persia decided to burn all the crops and villages along the way so that Alexander's army would fall. This probably would have worked, but the other generals did not want to give up their land this easily. This led to the first battle at the river Granicus. Pretty much what happened here is Alexander was very outnumbered, probably 2-1. But with his sarissas and the other cavalry that he had, he ran in for a quick attack and it kind of surprised the Persians. They were expecting him to hold back and just shoot arrows and stuff. As they crossed the river, a lot of his men got taken out by bow and arrow, but Alexander didn't want to turn around. And what's even great about Alexander is that he was in there fighting his battles too. He wasn't just sending men in. And it said that at this time, a Persian rode up on Alexander and struck him on the head with his sword. His helmet took the brunt of the force and a piece of it broke off. Alexander then struck him down with his lance. Then from behind, another Persian raised his sword to Alexander. About to strike him, one of Alexander's men anticipated the hit, struck his arm, and took it off. So I don't know if that was just like a made-up part of the story, but it sounds pretty cool, so I'll keep it in. As the war went on, Alexander approached the opposing general. He then surrendered without a fight. So now after that fight, Persia knows that Alexander's the real deal. He just went in there outnumbered and took care of business. But Alexander was scared that he would get flanked by a naval attack, so he knew he had to do something. So he went out and took out the cities of Miletus and Halicarnassus. Again, I'm sorry about the pronunciation. These were huge port cities for Persia, and it definitely will help Alexander in the long run. He then went to Gordium, which was famous for the Gordium knot, which said whoever could untie the knot would rule Asia. Alexander took his sword and sliced it in half. That's probably one of the coolest things he's ever done, to be honest. A few months later, Alexander continued moving east to the Nur Mountains, where he got flanked by the Persian royal army. He had the mountains on one side and the army on the other, so he was stuck. But do you think he cared? No. The war that took place here was called the Battle of Issus. Alexander attacked quick, which caught the Persians off guard. Although this was a tough battle for Alexander and it didn't go smoothly, he was able to force the Persian leader Darius to retreat. And then once the news got around that Darius retreated, the rest of the troops ran too. Now that Alexander won this fight, it was time to take on some more naval cities. But one city fought back, and that's the city of Tyre. It was an island city, so Alexander really didn't think that he needed to go take care of it. He was just going to leave it alone. But then it's said that the people that lived in the city taunted Alexander, saying, "You wouldn't come, you can't come take it." So guess what he did? Over the next 7 months, he built a land bridge from land all the way to the city just to go there and demolish the whole thing. Imagine taunting someone and then you're watching them build right to your city. That must have been tough. And then right after that, he took the city of Gaza too. By the time Alexander made it to the Nile Delta, the Persian governor of Egypt surrendered the entire province to him. And then when he made it to Memphis, priests welcomed Alexander and crowned him pharaoh, and then he went to the mouth of the Nile and founded the first city that he named after himself, Alexandria. Eventually he named like 13 cities after himself, so it only gets crazier from here. But Alexander was not done here. He didn't want to take part of the Persian Empire, he wanted it all. And he also wanted to take out Darius III, the general that got away in the mountains. Alexander heard that up north the Persians had a great army assembled, led by the man he wanted to kill, and headed straight for it. This is what's known as the Battle of Guatemala. Again, Alexander was outnumbered 2-1, and this was also the first time he dealt with war elephants. Long story short, Alexander was able to outsmart the Persians by changing up his normal formation and confusing them. Darius retreated again, forcing the rest of his troops to retreat as well. So Alexander was getting really upset with Darius because every time he got close to him, he would just run away. So as Alexander kept grabbing more land, it was time to go into the capital city of Babylon. Here, Alexander was welcomed as the new ruler of Persia. He went even further down to Persepolis, where he went and burned down the city as retribution for the attack on Greece by Persia in 480 BC. Alexander was really out here just getting retribution for anything. Even though he now technically conquered Persia, there was still one loose end for Alexander, and that was the fact that Darius was still alive. Alexander found out where Darius ran to and went there instantly. Right before Alexander got there though, Darius's own men killed him. So you think that Alexander's done now? Wrong. He still wanted to move east and collect even more of Persia. Alexander wanted to kill a man named Bessus, another Persian leader that said he was the rightful ruler of Persia. By the time Alexander made it to the city of Kunduz, Bessus's men handed him over in chains to Alexander. He was then sent back to Persia and executed. And this takes us to the final city that Alexander founded. He named it Alexandria Eskit, which meant Alexander the furthest because this was the furthest east he went. And so with this city, he reached the end of the Persian Empire. But of course, now he wanted to go into India because why would he be happy with all of Persia? So up until this point, for the last 10 years, Alexander and his army have gone thousands of miles and never lost a battle. And Alexander wanted to continue, but his men were tired of winning. There was no loss in sight, and all they wanted to do was just go home to their families. So they told Alexander that they are not going to fight anymore. Alexander was very upset with this, but decided it is probably best to go home. Now back at the Persian capital, Alexander had a mass wedding for 80 of his noblemen. This was a gesture of appreciation to the people that stayed loyal to him. But Alexander in his head was still not done taking over land. In 323 BC, Alexander was planning to go into the Arabian Peninsula to take more land. But just like his father, a couple days before it was planned to go to war, he died at the age of 32. There was no main successor for the new empire, so there was a big power struggle throughout the whole empire. And during these conflicts, Alexander's only son was murdered. But anyways, back to Alexander. Alexander died in Persia but was meant to be buried back in Macedonia where he was born. As his body was en route to Macedonia, it was hijacked and apparently ended up in Alexandria in Egypt. The location of where the casket went is still one of the great mysteries today. So tell me what you think about Alexander. I think he's one of the coolest historical figures that there is. During one of the craziest times in history, he never lost a battle and he took over all of Persia. All of this starting at the age of 20. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.